All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're exploring a very specific story of Palestine's history, one that's told through a lens of faith and deep spirituality. The source material for this explainer frames everything not just through the lens of modern conflict, but through a powerful legacy of divine promise and prophetic history.
And this quote right here, it really gets to the heart of the whole narrative we're looking at today. It sets the stage by asking us to look past the headlines and to start the story in a totally different place, in the sacred history of a land that's been blessed for generations.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the land's sacred foundation, then look at a principle of just rule. From there, we'll explore the modern rupture that the source calls the catastrophe. Then, we'll see the narrative of resilience and faith, and we'll wrap it all up with the idea of an unbreakable divine promise.
Okay, so let's begin. Section 1. You'll notice the source material doesn't kick off in the 20th century. Nope, it goes back thousands of years to establish this land's identity as a sacred foundation, a literal stage for prophets and divine revelation. According to this narrative, we're not just talking about a piece of geography. It's presented as a unique sanctuary on Earth. A cradle of revelation where the moral history of humanity really took shape. The idea is that the very soil is a witness to generations of prayer and devotion. And this timeline just shows you how deep that heritage goes. The source connects the land to the prophet Abraham and his blessed family line. Then it points to the time of prophets David and Solomon in Jerusalem, an era remembered in this telling for its justice and fairness. And then there's this absolutely pivotal moment, Prophet Muhammad's night journey to Al-Aqsa, which really weaves Jerusalem right into the spiritual heart of the Muslim world. That incredible prophetic history leads us right into our second section. This is where we learn about what the source calls a golden principle of governance, a kind of benchmark for how to live together in peace and justice.
So here it is, a really key concept, the golden principle. The source presents this not as an idea, but as a historical reality. The prime example given is when Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab entered Jerusalem. It's described as this model of rule based on a sacred promise, a covenant to protect people of all faiths.
And the source gets really specific about what this looked like in practice. It paints this picture of a city truly at peace, where the rights of every single community were actively defended. Christians kept their holy sites safe. Jewish families were able to come back to their neighborhoods. There was this genuine sense of shared security for everyone.
And this is the crucial takeaway here. It's the connection the source makes between the morality of the rulers and the well-being of the land itself. According to this story, when you have just rule, you get dignity and coexistence. But when you have tyranny, what follows is suffering and oppression. This idea becomes a really central theme as the story continues.
And that brings us to the great turning point in this entire narrative. Section 3 throws us into the modern age, which the source describes as a time of the deepest wounds, a fundamental shattering break from that sacred history we just talked about.
So, from the source's perspective, this is the timeline of the modern conflict. It starts back in 1917, with foreign powers making decisions about the land. Then it leads to the massive, pivotal event of 1948, known as the Nakba, and continues into what's described as over 7 decades of ongoing occupation.
The narrative really zeroes in on 1948 as this singular, catastrophic moment. The source emphasizes the sheer scale of the displacement, explaining that hundreds of thousands of people were forced from homes their families had lived in for generations. It just completely changed the reality on the ground.
Then the source focuses on something so personal, what people carried with them as they were forced to leave. And these weren't just random things. They were powerful symbols of who they were, the Quran representing their faith, land deeds, proof of legal ownership, and maybe the most heartbreaking of all, the keys to houses they could no longer go back to. And that painful history leads us directly into the contemporary experience that the source describes. So Section 4 shifts from historical events to the day-to-day reality of life under occupation, and the absolutely central role of faith in being able to endure it. The source lists out these specific ongoing hardships. It talks about a constant pressure, land being taken, homes being destroyed, ancient olive groves uprooted, and even children being imprisoned. These are presented not as isolated events, but as daily realities. The narrative then turns its focus to Gaza, describing it as a place where all this hardship is just magnified to an unbelievable degree. The source talks about the destruction of the most basic things, hospitals and schools, and the horrific erasure of entire family lines from existence.
And yet, in the middle of all of that chaos and destruction, the source highlights this quote as the ultimate expression of resilience. It's a phrase, it says, that's whispered even as bombs are falling. It's presented as the very core of an unwavering faith, something stronger than any hardship.
Now, this is a really crucial part of the story. The suffering isn't presented as random or meaningless. It's framed as a collective trial that echoes the great tests faced by the prophets themselves: Joseph, Abraham, Job, Mary. The idea from the source is that an entire nation is now bearing these trials, all at once.
And now we've arrived at the final section, which really brings this whole story full circle. It goes right back to that foundation of faith, connecting the resilience of the people to a divine promise and, this is important, the crucial role of simply bearing witness to their story.
The source tries to capture this resilience through these specific, powerful images. Sharing your last piece of bread when you have nothing, forming lines to pray together in the middle of rubble, and whispering a prayer of acceptance, of return to God, even after losing absolutely everything. These are shown as proof of an unbreakable spirit.
The source material itself is actually framed as a digital memorial. It's an act of witnessing, built on the belief that telling the story is a way to fight against being erased. The core belief here is that truth and memory, they will always, always outlast any form of oppression.
And this is the ultimate promise that holds the entire narrative together. This verse from the Quran is presented as a guarantee of divine justice. It's a statement of faith that no act of oppression goes unseen and that a final reckoning is coming. It's the source's concluding affirmation.
So we end with this question, a question the source is really asking you. After hearing this account, the story of prophets and covenants, of catastrophe and unbreakable faith, the narrative suggests that you, the listener, have now joined a long line of witnesses. And it leaves us all to think about what that role means, what it means to carry the memory of a people who, according to this story, simply refuse to disappear.